Hey, it's the Redeye Stream number 122. Dystopia books, how accurate are they becoming? I mean, really, okay, the stuff over the weekend and, it started on Friday with Tommy Robinson, being thrown away in prison. Who knows what's happening to him? Hopefully he's okay still. Um, that on top of Big Brother, the NSA surveillance mechanism, and all these other things coming together. I mean, really, is 1984 a reality, guys?
Yes.
And I'm sure if you guys want to announce yourselves, you can. I'm pretty sure everybody already knows who we all are, so I figured we'd jump right into it. Go ahead, MC.
So basically, I get to be the one that starts this shit show.
Well,
as far as
I brought up the NSA. I brought up the NSA, so I just wanted to throw it to you immediately. Might as well get it started, right?
Well, okay. I mean, if I'm going to defend the NSA, you guys just don't get what the NSA is there for. But that's regardless. All right. The technology is technology. The ability to do something is the ability to do something. You're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. Okay. What you have to do is find ways to mitigate it and find ways to handle it within the social constructs as they exist. Okay. If you're not willing to do that, though, yeah, then you do run into a problem where there's a mass surveillance state. It can happen. The technology does exist. All right. But then again, in many ways, even without that technology, that was always something that was happening, in totalitarian regimes at all the time anyway. Now, the problem that you're starting to see, all right, is in Great Britain, where they had this, okay, we got cameras on every street, we're nice and safe. Okay, you're nice and safe now. Now look what it's turned into. You can't even film, all right, people going in and out of a courthouse that were part of a grooming gang. All right. The guy on trial didn't even get any time. He got probation for having sex with an 11-year-old child. Meanwhile, Tommy Robinson, well, he broke parole because he's telling people about this. How dare he do something like that? Throw him in the hole for 13 months. That's what you're dealing with.
Yeah, you put it that way, and that really puts it into perspective, really. It seems the priorities in merry old England are radically misconstrued from where they used to be. Things are getting quite insane. And I don't even know if it's necessarily the Tommy Robinson thing that really is getting to me. But you add that to the girl who got arrested for writing rap lyrics. You add that to Dankula being grossly offensive. You add that to the fact that the other night I was talking to a person on Chair's channel who believes nobody on the internet should be able to be anonymous. All of us using avatars, we should be showing our faces right now, and it should be required, is what he said. Add that in there. Then everybody knows what you're saying. There's no way to protect yourself at all. And you end up like Lauren Southern, tossed out on your ass if you try to go to fucking England to see the fucking Stonehenge or something. Shit is radically out of control.
Well, that brings up a very interesting point. Is anonymity a right on the internet?
Anonymity.
My answer to that would be yes.
Agreed. Okay. I completely agree. We should have the right to use avatars. If you don't want to put your face out there for whatever reason, you should have that right.
Is that something that should be put
on? Yeah, like when I was a cop, I didn't have a Twitter or Facebook or anything.
Yeah. Well,
none of that.
Let's compare this to the press. Okay, if I don't have the right for anonymity, then they don't have the right to publish somebody's name anonymously.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, why is it that they get to sit up there and hide people's identities, but I can't have my identity hidden?
What are your sources?
When you think about it, that's exactly the same process that we're going through right now. All right, we are doing something in the public sphere. All right, we're talking in a public forum. All right, basically putting out reporting on knowledge as we see it. All right. How is that any different than the press? How come they get to pick and choose who can be anonymous and who doesn't have to be anonymous?
Because they're on TV. Is there another answer?
If someone wants to find me that bad, come and find me. I'll throw hands though. I throw some serious hands. Like, I mean,
am I making the wrong point here? Or am I missing something? Well, why can't people be allowed to speak their minds freely, especially considering? And let's be perfectly frank, the reason people want to be anonymous on the internet is because other people will hunt them down.
But why are other people hunting them down?
Just because they don't like what they say. They're trying to stifle free speech.
Because
it's the mob mentality.
That's why.
Well, what if the mob is hunting folks that are actually greater in number than the mob? See, that would be the counter argument, is that if you get everybody to actually speak their mind out there, then all of a sudden a lot of these folks that are attacking certain folks might realize, maybe not everybody or many or most folks think like us. Maybe they actually think like other folks. So that's just a counter argument.
What does that have to do with hunting people online and getting together mobs to deal with them?
Well,
it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much for people to go after somebody else as a group. And when you got a collective group working that, it doesn't matter if they're the most populous. They just have to matter whether or not they can stand together in a collective. Organization is a powerful thing. That's why, for the most part, even today, we are ruled, and I'm going to use that term, ruled by a small, group of people. Now, we are less ruled than Great Britain, but we're still ruled.
Well, organization makes a huge difference. I mean, anyone that's played World of Warcraft, the difference between an organized group and a pickup group is night and day.
Oh, yes.
So, I mean, if you get together a group of people that are radically, that have radical identitarian politics about them, whether it be on the left or the right, they become far more strengthened, all right, when you give them the ability to eliminate critics that aren't necessarily part of another group. And what does that do? That drives them into another group just for the perspective of trying to keep yourself safe. It's the same type of mentality that takes place on the streets every single day in a lot of these large cities where you got gangs going on. If you're not part of one gang, then you better be part of another one, because if you don't join a gang, you're not protected, and therefore you get beaten up.
Well, that's a bit of a different situation. I understand how you relate to the internet. Well, actually, to be fair, it probably really isn't all that. It isn't. In the context, it's similar, but to say that that's the same for everything that folks say online, I mean, well, let's look at it this way. If everybody was like, well, I know who folks are, maybe we'd have less Nazi memes, which would take away from the whole fuel of saying, oh, look at all these Nazis and stuff they don't know, when folks are just fucking shitposting and shit.
Okay, so what do you gain from that? How does society gain from that?
You expand the Overton window massively. You really just bash a hole in the Overton wall. And that would be if everybody was acting honestly. Which
yeah, well, like that's an expectation that we should have.
It's a dream, man. It's a dream.
Now you know why we have all these freaking utopian books. It's because of people like memes.
Yeah.
Well, I never said they were bad. Well, the ethos and pathos might be okay. The actual logos.
Well, real quick. Okay, so I was telling you guys off air about this book that hardly anybody I know has heard of it. I guess Wolfshock's heard of it. But the USSA, the United Secured States of America, and there's only a little thing on the back I want to read real quick. It happened without warning. A media blackout, a military coup, and suddenly the USA had became the United Secured States of America. Whatever they called it, it was still a police state. Overnight, rock music was banned, movies were censored, and outspoken teachers began to vanish. Soon, any person who dared question the new authorities was in danger as well. To be fair, this book was written in like 1987, and it takes place in 97. So, I mean, it's a little dated, but still. Don't you think that that's kind of happening in Great Britain already? If you're outspoken about the rape gangs or anything, you begin to disappear like Tommy Robinson, and the media has a blackout. They're not allowed to talk about it. And you go to jail too if you do speak up. That's why Sargon is being such a cunt or a cuck, whatever you want to call him. But he won't speak up about Tommy because he's scared to be blackbagged. And could that actually happen in the USA? 40 or whoever wants to start.
I would say yes. Not only could it happen, if you're not careful, it's going to happen. Now, I accept that our two countries are completely different, but yet, in a lot of ways, they're very similar. We've got the Muslim invasion, and God knows what you guys have got, because...
The Mexican invasion?
I didn't want to directly say the words, but yes, okay, the Mexican invasion. You can see the similarities I'm going for with that, can't you?
Yeah. No, there are similarities there. Now, I would disagree with you to a slight extent, only because of how the structure is. One of the things that people in the United States, when it comes to weapons and things like that, when you talk about the military swears its loyalty to the Constitution of the United States, and that's both a strength and a weakness. Okay, so in order for the United States military to have a coup, to create a coup, you would need the military, the vast majority of the military members, right, to think that the Constitution of the United States doesn't exist as far as have any real meaning. Okay. You can have a civil war where both sides are claiming that they have the right version of the meaning, but you won't have a coup per se. All right. If, however, you tear down the rule of law in this country to where laws don't matter, all right, it doesn't matter. It's just a matter of who's in charge and who's in power. If that becomes a popular sentiment amongst the military members, then yeah, you can have a military coup. You could have a military takeover. All right. Now, that's not the same thing in Britain, all right, where you're losing rights for freedom of speech because, for all intents and purposes, your elected officials are putting in laws to prevent you from having it.
Yeah, and it just seems like, I don't know, the description for this book, I did read it before. It's poorly written, but I think the idea is good. That, and, add in, like, let's say V for Vendetta, the graphic novel version or the movie version. That took place in Great Britain. And the whole premise for that is the population is just force-fed this state-ran media, BBC, and, they don't really know the truth about anything. And, I mean, it takes a terrorist action to actually make people open their eyes and do something. Now, this is far from a call to arms. It's not. But is that what it's going to take? Or is it going to take Tommy Robinson to fucking die? I mean, something has to open people's eyes. And I know we talked about this on the weekend, but we're talking about dystopia future. I think it's now.
Agreed. Completely agree with you on that. As much as you're saying dystopia, suggesting upcoming problems, I don't actually think they're as upcoming as people think. I think there are more of them here now than is on its way. The situation is going to need to get better very quickly and very, very strongly before we got any hope of any sort of normality coming back again. And to be honest, the whole Tommy Robinson thing, if he dies, he will become a martyr. And I actually think our government is nervous about that. But the problem is they've painted themselves in a corner with what they've done. If they let him out, they're going to show weakness. If they don't let him out and he dies, they're in deep trouble.
What do you see any other version of this that comes out from a peaceful manner?
Would you like my completely honest answer there?
Yeah, actually I would.
No, I do not think that we're going to get out of this peacefully, not unless things change massively, that's the problem.
Well, in order for that to take place, wouldn't you need the press to try and spread that, to try and prevent this thing from taking place?
I would agree, except for the fact that, as pre-stated, our press is as free as, well, Tommy is. They are pretty much completely controlled by the government. I'm sorry to make it sound so light, but it's the only way I could put it without swearing. Our media is controlled by our government. Does that remind you of anything with the dystopian books? Our people that stand up against it are put away. Again, back to the dystopian books. We are literally living in the precursor to a dystopian existence. Enjoy.
Yeah, all that really seems to be missing is the changing of the actual language. You know, the actual English language gets changed in 1984. That and the continual war. Well, maybe that's not missing.
Both of those points are actually still apply. Think about it. The language we use on the internet is completely changed from language that would normally be used between people interacting face to face. But nowadays, you actually hear the word cuck being used out on the street. The language has already changed. We are that close to dystopia. People might want to seriously start prepping for what's coming, in my opinion.
So what you're saying is buy those water filters now.
Guns, food, medical equipment, loo roll. Okay?
You can't forget the loo roll.
Oh, God, no. Loo roll will be gold when the troubles start. And no, I'm not making fun of the gold joke, man. Don't worry.
That actually is the best place to camp out when college students are moving in. By a local pharmacy or store like that. Because everyone moves in, they plan for everything. They forget the toilet paper.
Yep. Very true.
But 40, you've been doing a lot of work on 1984 for future videos. Don't let us know exactly what you're going to say, but what's your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, a good oh gosh. Well, I would say damn near everything has come true. I mean, especially looking at God, I don't want to give too much away, but well, let's just look at like the Ministry of Truth, for instance. So in Britain, the government has control of the BBC, right? And with all the sensationalism about fake news and, you know, Elon Musk's little Pravda website and all that stuff, the reality of the matter is that every day that goes by, it's just a little bit harder to find out the truth. You know, watching one person's video on YouTube, some say, well, Tommy Robinson, he didn't break any laws, he was perfectly, justified in his stance, and he shouldn't be in prison. But on the other side, you're going to find people to say, no, I mean, he was actually rather close to the courtroom. I mean, you know, he was filming people going in and out of the courtroom, or whatever the case might be, and they say, well, he should be in jail. So, I mean, already in just that one instance, you have two conflicting reports on just one scenario. And so which one do you think the government's going to support? No, it's quite fucking ridiculous. You know, not to mention the fact that over here in the United States election, between Trump and Hillary, you had direct intervention agencies. Maybe not the body as the whole, but there are definitely people of prominent power who dipped their dick in that election, for sure, in support of Hillary.
You trying to say something, Memes?
What?
Oh, I thought. Okay, yeah, you came on, and I thought you were trying to say something. I don't know. He brought up Trump and Hillary. MC, what do you think? I mean, yeah, the media tried to fuck with it, but they didn't really. They failed miserably.
Well, the media's failed because their ability to totally control the narrative has been shattered. All right, and it's been shattered for a variety of reasons. So their total narrative control is gone. And the problem, let's be honest, Hillary was unelectable because she was corrupt, and it was so obviously corrupt. In other words, the DNC picked an obviously corrupt, horrible candidate, right? But let's assume that they picked somebody else, right? That wasn't as horribly corrupt. What would have then happened? All right, could the DNC have easily won this? Yeah, in my mind, they definitely could have. All right. Now, I'm not saying that Bernie Sanders would, if they'd have picked Bernie Sanders, that would have happened. But if they would have picked, because Bernie has his own, skeletons and his own problems. All right. However, if they'd have picked somebody like an O'Malley, all right, where the press would easily have been able to hide any kind of malfeasance he had engaged in, then yeah, they could have definitely tilted the scales, especially considering the fact that the agencies themselves were literally and intentionally spying on the Trump campaign for political purposes. Right, this is a major problem within the country. Right, this is a far bigger scandal in many ways than Watergate. If people would, if the press really cared enough to actually look at it, the fact that the press is still to this day in denial that this is happening, even though they have the evidence sitting in their hands, and they keep going out of their way to cover it up until it becomes too obvious. For example, the Stephen Halper's name was out there for months before the press would even acknowledge the fact, all right, that there was a spy, that they had placed a spy in the Trump campaign, right? Even to this day, they won't talk about the Hillary emails, or not really the Hillary emails, but the Podesta emails, and go into what those emails said. They'll just sit there and say the WikiLeaks emails did it for them. Well, what were in the WikiLeaks emails, right? CNN hasn't reported what was in those emails. All right. ABC hasn't reported what's in those emails. So they're still trying to push that. The problem is that other people have various other means, all right, to actually read what were in those emails. All right. So that they knew how corrupt Hillary was. Now, let's be perfectly honest. Not everybody likes Donald Trump. A lot of people can't stand the man. They look at him from the perspective of he's a rich, fat guy who's as dirty in their minds as anything that Hillary was engaged with. And that's their philosophy, that's their viewpoint. Now, the press has been trying to play that up, of course, all right? And it kind of feeds into the idea of, okay, this is the kind of news that I want, so therefore this is what I'm listening to, all right? All right, which adds another problem within the narrative. Okay, so what you see is basically, because the narrative's been broken, you're seeing what people are constantly saying is polarization taking place within the country. Now, that's within the United States. When you talk about a dystopian society, however, within England, from what I can see so far is the press, you can't even have an alternative press because the media or the government has banned it. The government has literally banned any press clippings or any reporting on anything it deems it doesn't want you to report on. And the idea that somehow this was acceptable for national security reasons, all right, is what allowed them to get this kind of power, and look what they're using it on. Well, you can't report on Dankula. You can't report on time. You can't report that the guy was even arrested.
Yeah, and what's really weird about that is Tim Pool had a lawyer on. And they were talking about the reason that the British have this law to where the judge could put a blackout on media coverage is because they look at our court proceedings and they think we are just horrible because we have the guy does a perp walk like Weinstein did. Oh, he already looks guilty. So how are you going to get a good jury to actually, not be tainted? And I can get that, but this was about Tommy being sentenced. He's already gone in jail. There's no court proceeding here. Why are you doing a media blackout other than the fact that you don't want to look, bad?
Well, I'm sorry, but the idea that somehow the media is should be, you're expecting the media not to report. Okay. So the guy you're trying to protect is innocent if he's supposedly innocent. Well, guess what? Even when a person's guilty in the United States, all right, since it's a jury of your peers, you're going to have to trust the nation, all right, to be able to see through some of that stuff. Now, does that mean it's a perfect system? No, of course not. You're going to have miscarriages of justice that do happen. But what's the reality? Okay. We have a case now where you can't even report that this guy's even arrested. Okay, how are you protecting him when you're not even willing to tell people that this guy's been arrested? You can't even report on his arrest or his offense.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, let's be honest. What was he doing? He was recording the people going in and out of a rape gang trial, a grooming gang trial, right? And the guy who had been doing it with an 11-year-old walked free. That's the reason they were frickin' not reporting it, is they didn't want to let people know that they were going to let this guy go and go back out on the street again. That they were going to, they had already made up their minds that this guy was going to walk. This had nothing to do with protecting Tony Robinson's rights or even protecting the criminal. This is protecting the government.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Adrian, welcome. And yeah, I don't know. I was listening to them talk about it, and yeah, it seems even by their own standards, though, that this blackout is ridiculous. As I said, he was already sentenced. He's already in prison. They're not protecting anybody but themselves here.
The only point to the media blackout was to protect their idea of a diversity, because the whole point of the D notice is supposed to be for if it's going to be a few different reasons. One, the main one is a threat to national security. And the only threat would be if the people were aware that this guy walked free. And I actually didn't know that he walked free until MC said it. But the biggest crime in the UK right now is if you go against their idea of diversity, if you go against what the government wants you to believe. I mean, this seems to me has been proven time and time again by the fact that the police have done very little to stop these gangs. And then one of the worst, I thought, things the police ever did was when there was an article that came out, maybe it was about almost 2 months ago now, where it was talking about how the UK police were searching for a Facebook user simply because he said mean things about these grooming gangs. So this was the whole point of the D notice. It is absolutely like a disgusting thing what the UK government has done.
Completely agree.
And haven't these D notices? Well, real quick, Jensen or Voice, one of you guys that would know, how long has this D notice thing been in effect? Like since 1925 or something, right? A long ass time.
I don't know exactly when it started, but it's slightly to one side on this, but you know that news map site I've given you guys? Not a single mention about anything to do with Tommy Robinson is on that. And that is worldwide, not just England. So this cutout of information that's going on isn't just the English government. It seems to be going all over, just so you know.
Well, for those of you that did watch my video, it was 1925 it was brought in, intent.
That's what I said, right? I did watch your video, only half of it though. I got through 8 minutes and I'm like, I can't read these UK laws anymore. Sorry, Voice. I hit thumbs up and left.
I was reading them out. You didn't have to read it all.
I had to read it. Your accent is pretty thick. Kidding. Hey, I stopped with the Scottish jokes. You gotta leave me some wiggle room here. All right, I gotta be grossly offensive still.
No, he's right though. If you go, you have to go on the internet. You have to be aware of the internet to see what's going on with this. Okay, with Tony Robinson. I mean, because you're not seeing it in CNN. Did they say anything about it? Now, Fox News may see something about it. I don't know. I don't really watch Fox News, but that's if it's done anywhere, it'll only be on Fox News. And quite frankly, Americans don't really care what's going on overseas. I'm going to be perfectly blunt. If it isn't something that directly affects them, they don't care about it if it's overseas.
Well, I can tell you for sure that I went looking pretty hard today for it, and the Canadian media was completely mum on it. Only Rebel Media was reporting anything on it, and they ended up saying that they were having to fight with the gag order that was issued in the UK.
Yeah, unless you, I mean, this is very similar to what happened during the Clinton administration, all right, during the impeachment trials, where there wouldn't have been any kind of information that was put out on Bill Clinton if it wasn't for the fact that it was broken by the internet. And it was only in the internet where people were getting information initially. Now, eventually, the media started reporting on it because it became too big of an issue. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen here because let's be frank. I mean, they had already painted Tony Robinson as a right-wing bomb-throwing anarchist. All right, that was trying to bring them down, the racist bigot. So why would anybody really care what happened to him? All right. Whereas at least with the Bill Clinton thing, he's still the president of the United States. People within the country were interested in what was going on with the president. Right, wrong, or indifferent, they're still going to be, that interest is automatically there. This is just a normal, everyday nobody, private citizen. I really don't see how anybody can't look at this and go, oh my God, what the hell has happened? But I mean, anybody in England anyway, or in Britain.
Like I say, they're a lot closer to the dystopian future than people are willing to accept.
Now, I've only been hearing this from Twitter, but has anybody confirmed whether Tommy Robinson was actually attacked in prison?
I haven't seen anything that would confirm it. No. I do know that he's been attacked before in prison, but that doesn't mean that he's been attacked now.
I would be extremely skeptical of anything that is coming out at the minute about Tommy. I think if you see something like that, research it for yourself.
Agreed.
But the problem is who do you rely upon to research it? I mean,
well, I would go to the facts. I would look at the government websites of attacks, the prison itself, the local paper that deals with the prison. It will take time. Like, I know the majority of people don't have the time to do it, but there are ways of finding out by going straight to the source.
Well, I know, I understand that, but the problem is how do we get to these sources if you don't know where to go for these resources to look up this stuff? You're kind of beholden to some media source.
No, right, I'm sorry, MC. MC, I'm sorry. That's I agree with you, but I disagree with you because there is laziness. If, like, when I first did a very in-depth video, I didn't run around which website should I go to. I went through all the websites and one led to one and one led to another, and finally I got to the facts that were the actual numbers. I mean, you can do it. It takes time. You just don't take. I mean, unlike many on the left and the right, you don't accept the first thing you see. At least I don't.
I understand that. And I'm talking, and I'm speaking more in a generic type of sense. Okay.
Oh, right.
But because people, like you said, people won't take the time. People tend to be, okay, why should I be even looking at this? It comes down to just how much do you really care about these issues? All right. If people don't care about the issue, if they don't care about freedom of speech, and for whatever reason, if the reason you don't care about this story is because you don't think freedom of speech is under assault, okay, then why would you research it? Really in depth. Is this really going on? If you already have a predilection that you don't believe it. And what's more is that if you're a listener to the mainstream media, they're going to tell you, everything's fine, everything's great. Don't bother looking what's behind the curtain. Lowest common denominator stuff, unfortunately. Now, yeah, you can find stuff if you dig deep and you really research this, all right? But most people, you know, they want to just put their heads down and plod on, right? I mean, that's basically what Sargon is doing. Is he's like, okay, I got to put my head down and I got to continue on with the way I see things. You know, I got to do what's, you know, I got to keep myself out of trouble, right?
Well, I will say this: it was very, very telling that on the video with Tommy Robinson, he didn't have time to talk about Tommy, but what was the first thing he did? He showed his next meetup, his paid next meetup. That's very telling.
Well, I mean, I understand the quandary that he's in. Okay, my problem with Sargon isn't that he's in a quandary over it. My problem with Sargon is that he claimed to be a leader, and okay, well, now's your time to be a leader. You can't be a leader only when times are good. Okay, a little bit of adversity, and next thing you know, you're putting your head down. Okay, you're not a leader then. Okay, that's not what makes a leader. All right, I'm sorry, it's not what makes a leader. So he basically, because of what he's done, he basically killed this entire idea of a liberalist movement. Right, it doesn't exist anymore. Right, why? Because there's no leadership anymore. Because the self-proclaimed leader of the movement basically won't lead on the very issue, the core issue that you have to obtain, freedom of speech. You back down. You weren't going to sit up there and put yourself out there for it. Okay, well then you're not the leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. All right, so any other dystopian books that kind of seem relevant? I mean, A Brave New World, Chemical Dependency to Cull the Masses. That kind of sounds relevant.
Sounds like that's what's happening right now with the amount of pills they like to hand out to the kids.
Well, yeah, and suddenly everybody is depressed, right? Like everybody has depression all of a sudden. Everybody is bipolar. Like, I don't know. It just seems like a way to give them more pills that makes you kind of in a zombie state where you're more compliant, right?
I believe the term you're looking for is chemical pacification.
I think the biggest crime out of that is this is what they're starting to do with children these days. Any little kid that acts up in school, and immediately the teacher and a lot of other people are saying, well, put them on drugs. You know, they're just out of hand, when this is exactly the way that children are supposed to be, especially if we're talking about young boys who are the main ones being put on these drugs. And we don't even know how it's going to affect them in the future. Although I get the impression that it's going to probably just make them, even if they got off the drugs later on in life, since you put them on it when they're in developing brain, is probably going to keep them more or less pacified for the rest of their lives, which makes it a lot easier for you to control them.
Is it really making people more pacified? At least from the United States perspective, the more chemicals it seems that we're dumping on the kids, the more likely we're having, the likely it is that we're going to have a school shooting.
Yeah, I would say that both of you are right. I mean, I think Adrian is correct. I mean, look at the amount of, many people call them soy boys, but that could have been a long-term result of being on things like Ritalin. It may kill testosterone, but again, there will be outliers that go completely the different way, and that's where the school shooters come in. So you could both be right.
I mean, these last few school shooters have been basically, they've had mental problems, identified mental problems for years.
Well, yeah, and if you look at what Ritalin and Adderall is, it's an amphetamine. It's pretty much crystal meth that's in a more pure form and in pills, easily consumable. So, I mean, you're hyping these 11-year-old boys up on speed and then, just sending them loose. I don't know. It doesn't sound like a good idea. And it definitely doesn't seem to help brain development. I couldn't imagine a speed habit could really do well with an 11-year-old brain.
It's probably because the alternative too is way too much work and too much money, which would be to put them through therapy in order to get them back on track. I mean, my wife, when I first met her, she was really she had a lot of her own problems, a lot of emotional problems. And over the last few years, me and her parents had been talking to her, and she went into therapy. Before that, she was on all sorts of antidepressants and other medication, which really screwed with her head in different ways. But now, ever since she's gone through this therapy, she is more or less a regular person now. She's been a regular person for the last year or two. And it's all been because she went through therapy, which actually got her back on track, gave her the coping mechanisms to deal with things that she couldn't deal with before. But that would be too difficult for a lot of people these days. Better off just giving them a drug and pacifying them that way.
Yeah, no, I was hoping 40 or somebody would speak up. 40, your thoughts on chemical pacification? Okay, fine. He must have stepped away. Voice, any other thoughts then? I have a little bit of background noise. The babies just got up, so somebody take over.
Wow, background noise. How rare that is at your house, Mod.
Well, hey, it's coming up on summertime. I'm hoping it'll get better. So
how is it going to get better when the kids are never gone?
Well, they'll be outside. it rains a lot in Oregon. They've been inside all fucking winter.
Mod,
is that the excuse?
The first day there isn't frost on the ground, the kids go out and you don't let them back in until the first snow falls.
Basically, ban them from the household is the solution, right?
Works.
Yes.
No, but Soma in A Brave New World, Soma was used as a recreational type of drug that was encouraged. All right. Yes, it did have the other effects, but the populace was convinced that this was something that you took just to calm yourself down. It was a part of your everyday, food or, source for the most part. Recreational drug use is really what it came down to. All right. Taken to the extent of this is how you deal with life, is you basically drug yourself to the point where you don't care anymore. Right.
So are you going where I think you're going with this? The legalization of marijuana that lots of state governments are now embracing?
Well, I mean, you could look at it from that perspective. I don't draw that equivalency. No. I mean, I'm just putting it out there from the perspective of how it's something that the state was providing, because the state was providing this. Now, in Oregon, are they basically growing marijuana plants and intentionally giving it to people?
No, but every household is allowed 4 plants legally. Nobody can do anything to anybody. So, I mean, other than the feds. I know we've had that argument. The feds could do what they want, but it is now legal. If you're over 21, you can grow 4 plants in your house.
So, I mean, unless it's being encouraged by the state, provided by the state, then I don't think you have a problem. The moment that when somebody says this is going to be provided by the state, then you got to be careful. Then you got to look out, because it's the state making that choice for you. It's the state getting itself involved in this situation. All right. This is the problem with the schools. Okay, with the schools, the teachers are basically demanding that these kids be drugged, and they're using the power of the state to enact it. They're saying you have to take your kid and you have to listen to whatever the doctor says. And of course, the doctor, especially the ones that they're going to provide it to, the doctor's going to basically say, okay, well, if the kid's acting up, here's the prescription for that. It's already been written out for them. All right. He's not going to sit up there and go, there's nothing wrong with this kid, don't come back again. All right. Because the doctors are incentivized by having patients. The more patients he sees or she sees, the more the more money they get, the more insurance money they get, et cetera, et cetera. Now, is it unethical to do that? Yes, it is unethical to do that. Do a lot of doctors do that kind of stuff? You wouldn't have the kind of insurance fraud that we see in the United States if that was the case. And like it or not, from my perspective, insurance fraud seems to be on the rise, not on the decline.
Yeah, well, no, and also there's a lot of good movies that try to tackle this subject as well. If you look at the way technology is advancing and all this transhumanism fucking bullshit people are talking about, the rise of cybernetic technology, could Terminator actually one day come true? I know it's kind of out there, and we were kind of being serious, but really, what if we have robot overlords, Quinn? Are you going to bow to them?
Bow to them? Well, what choice are we going to have? But funny enough, to slightly segue, as we're talking about with the drugs, have you seen the Christian Bale movie Equilibrium? If you haven't, perhaps you should.
No, I haven't seen the movie.
Oh, it's.
I'm sorry, but Jansen and robot overlords, no, he would not follow their commands. He'd be trying to fuck them.
Trying to control them. What are you talking about? Robot overlord is going to be. No,
so that's how they're going to come into being? Is they're going to come in initially as sex bots?
I neither confirm or deny that.
Well, could you think of a more insidious way to end up with robot overlords? They end up like, convincing men that women are evil and that they should all buy these sex bots. And
well,
then
I hate to say this, but the men are being
over.
convinced that women are evil by people like Christy Winters and Anita Sarkeesian and her whole cohort.
Yeah, women are kind of shooting themselves in the foot on that one. Huh?
It doesn't take a lot of convincing, let's put it that way.
No.
But I mean, look at Japan and the birth rates, how it's plummeting. Yeah, you could end up with a sex bot fucking overlord over in Japan, at least. I don't know if American men are gonna fuck a robot, all right? I know I'm not. I'm no thank you. But
you're saying you're not Lando Calrissian?
Yeah, I'm not pansexual or robosexual, whatever the fuck.
For those people who don't get the reference, apparently in this latest movie, Solo, Lando Calrissian has a fling with a robot.
I don't see what's wrong with that, but hey.
Well, Voice, I think Voice, you not too long ago put out a video that was kind of talking about that, weren't you? You were talking about millennial women and then like how they have on average one abortion, how they have they have had the largest amount of STDs, and I think you were making some reference to that about the rise of sex robots, weren't you?
Yes, and while I may take the piss out of Johnson for wanting to fuck robots, I wouldn't be far behind him in the queue.
You're basically going to line up behind him, is that what it is?
With a false beard and a hoodie.
As long as you can't be seen, right?
It's almost to be expected these days. I mean, with all this talk about how you don't need a man in order to raise your children, or this talk about now about how people are starting to say about in vitro fertilization might be the way to go in order to have your own children. I think it's almost inevitable that we're going to reach that point where sex robots are just going, like everyone's going to have their own personal sex robot, and then there's no point for to have even a relationship. But if we're talking about robots taking over humanity, I actually think it's more likely going to come not so much in the robots we're thinking of, but it would be an AI. I mean, we're already starting to see it right now. Most of the job of censoring YouTube is being done by an AI algorithm, which is going around tracking what you say and what subject you're talking about. And those are really what's oppressing everyone. What happens when it eventually becomes, I guess, sort of in a way like Skynet, where people put all the hands of their defense, such as nuclear weapons, in the hands of an AI.
Now, see, to be honest, I think that the controls on those kind of devices are going to be far more severe. I think you're going to end up closer to the lines of you won't see it something like Skynet, but you will see something along the lines of the old Star Trek version on iMud.
Yeah, because like all the women there were they robots, or were they? They were. Remember, they were at least one of the episodes. They were taking pills in order to stay young.
Right. There was the three. Then the rehash was when he was on the robot planet. The androids, they were going to take over.
Oh yes, that's right. Huh, that's a pretty interesting way to put it. So I guess really you are talking about sex robots, so in a way then.
Well, they're there to serve humans, and humans want to be served, and therefore they'll serve all the needs and make all the decisions for you. Basically, you remain in a childlike state your entire life. You never grow. You never become an adult.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
Well, another possibility would just be making humans, as it's serving everyone, just if not keeping them in a childlike state, just keeping them weak as hell. Because the cartoon movie WALL-E was pretty much had that reference where all the humans were living on a spaceship, but every single one of their needs was taken care of. So every single human was some fat slob that had some machine moving them around. They couldn't walk. They interacted through a screen. Oh shit! I guess kind of in a way like we're doing now. But
yeah. It's great when people realize how close we are to that. It's fun to watch.
Well, there is a point to that. I mean, if you take a look at WALL-E, WALL-E's kind of a dystopian universe as well. All right, where people were stuck in their own little bubble of consumerism and never got themselves out of it.
And this is the world we're going to give to our children. Poor kids.
Oh, not me. I'm gonna build a bunker up in the fucking mountains. They'll inherit the bunker. It'll be on federal land too, where it's gonna claim it for the Confederacy.
Well, while you're building your bunker, how about we get some robots in to help you build it? Wouldn't that be easier for you?
No, I'm good. No, keep the robots away.
Well, your choice, mate. Just wanted to be helpful. That's what we're for. We're not trying to take over.
He's not trying to plant the spy in the midst of your revolution.
Oh God, no! That would be terrible to do something like that.
These aren't the spies you're looking for. These aren't the droids you're looking for.
No, but with the AI thing, if the AI is as shitty as the YouTube AI, we have nothing to worry about. It's when they perfect the son of a bitch. Like, didn't Google have that one AI that became a Nazi? I mean, that's already got to be getting them the idea that it's a bad idea.
Let's be honest. How did it become a Nazi?
It got all its information from the internet and trends on the net,
right?
And
because people drove it to become a Nazi. They drove it that way. They wanted it to become a Nazi. What
it was intentional. Yeah, I was just saying that it was intentional to make the robot into the Nazi. Like, people were sending it messages saying all sorts of things, and then it learned from that. Rather than it was just scouring the internet and became a Nazi that way, it really was because people were going out of their way to try and turn it that way.
Well, right. So people want Nazism. It's a natural freaking aspect of their lives, apparently.
Humanity just has a really great sense of humor, but that will bite us in the ass if we let AI take over.
I think the idea of throwing peoples into ovens as a goal for describing an AI bot is probably not the way you want to go about that.
Hang on. Let's not be bigots. Let's not judge other people's beliefs.
As long as you're in control, right, boys?
Oh, no one wants that.
It's okay, guys. My robots would make sure he just thinks he's in control. We'll have it all sorted for you. Everything will be fine. Trust us.
Oh, so we're to trust you. Is that what you're saying there, Jensen?
Of course. Trust me. We're making the world a better place.
I'm from the government. I'm here to help.
Taxation is theft. There.
I just want to point out, Jensen, that unfortunately me and you are playing into the stereotypical bad British person for wanting to take over the world.
You're assuming that we've not already taken it over and they just haven't realised yet. Oops, did I say that out loud?
You're just trying to legalize it?
Of course. We will be in control of all the laws. Don't worry, everything will be fine. You're not nervous now. I give up.
But I don't know. What other works of fiction seem to be able to be moved from the fiction to the non-fiction section of the library?
I'm still saying, check out Equilibrium, guys. It is scarily close to nowadays. They give everyone pills that everyone has to take at certain times of the day that pacifies them and keeps them all perfectly centered and controlled.
the problem with that kind of any kind of society that's based on that if you're going to create a society along those lines, or even if you're going to create a hive mind of some sort, is as soon as that society takes place, and isolated societies like that, which have happened in the past, that are very singular, all right, they are very stable, all right. The society doesn't change, it doesn't grow, it doesn't do anything. It stays more or less where it's at. The problem, of course, is that it doesn't grow. Society stays, in a stasis, more or less, and it becomes kind of a wonderful world for a period of time until it encounters something that's outside that's static model, and then things begin to fall apart. The society can actually just self-destruct in less than a generation as a result of that. So it's stable internally, but it's fragile from any kind of external output.
Agreed.
It's funny. Well, no, it's funny when you're describing that. I kept imagining the Aztec society, or even the Native Americans up here in North America. Those societies were fine, but they never really grew. They never really invented anything else other than what they needed. And then you had the Europeans show up, and all hell broke loose, right?
Well, I mean, there is a parallel there. It isn't necessarily direct, simply from the fact that disease was brought in. Although that you could look at that and say that's a natural aspect as well. All right, so, but yeah, no, you're exactly right. When you become too isolated, when you become too insular, the society itself can stabilize, and that can, in and of itself, can become a powerful force. What I was thinking of when I was talking about this was not Latin, the Native Americans or Indian cultures. I was actually thinking about China. China basically isolated itself from the rest of the world, and the culture was very stable. Japan did the same thing; it was very stable. But the society fell apart, especially in Japan. The society fell apart in less than a generation, right? From 1854 or 1856, I think it was 54, when the U.S. opened up by gunboat diplomacy Japan, until the Meiji Restoration, which is only just a few years later, right? So where the society begins to totally radically change itself, and the repercussions from that. They resonate even through Japan, even to today. Okay, so yeah, the society can be stable, and it can refine that quote unquote equilibrium. All right, to use the term from the movie that you were talking about, Jensen. But yeah, it's still very fragile from external threats.
Or even internal, if somebody is a rebel rouser or something, they could actually start changing, having a counterculture. And then the society, the ruling...
But countercultures exist only when they're... The thing, Mad Dodge, is countercultures exist only when they're allowed. You won't have a counterculture in a culture that stamps that kind of thought process out. It'll be just immediately eliminated. It'll never be allowed to spread.
Well, what about the stuff happening in the UK right now? Because they're trying to stamp it out, but they can't. It's a brush fire. The internet won't let them.
We'll see. That has yet to be determined. I hate to tell you this. That's yet to be determined. Yeah, I would not like that to happen in Great Britain. I would not like to see that happen. But we'll see if that brush fire can be stepped out or not. Because they're going about trying to step it out right now by preventing people from even finding out about it, and without press around, stamping on it. And so far, from my perspective, it seems to be fairly successful. Yeah, there seems to be some protests, but overall, I would say that they're fairly minor at this point.
Agree.
Well, that's a fair assessment, but I'm kind of happy with the protests. There was, 2 of them already, and they were organized within 24 hours. That's pretty quick. I mean, it's not the fucking Arab Spring or nothing, but you know what I mean? That's a pretty quick call to action. By action, I mean march and make your voice heard.
Okay, but is it really being heard? Or are you just talking into the echo chamber?
Did you
Is
guys...
is the wider society of Great Britain seeing this?
Good point. Did you guys actually see the march going on in Melbourne and 5 different cities in Australia, all about the Free Tommy?
Yeah, actually, I did see that.
So it does show that it is getting out there, but you are right, it's getting out there to the echo chamber, not to the standard populace, which are quite happy watching what the government tell them to watch.
I mean, I'm not trying to bash bash Great Britain, but that's great that it happened in Australia. But what effect does that have in Great Britain, where the problem is?
Yeah, no, you are right. We unfortunately, as harsh as this is going to sound, and this is going to make me sound really like a nasty bastard, but the only way this is really going to actually make much difference over here is if he dies and that word gets out. Hopefully that will be the accelerant needed to get the brush fire going.
Yeah, well, though, isn't it?
In the defense of Australia, they are a member of the Commonwealth, so it kind of counts. It's like if Canada had some marches, well, they'll never.
Well, not really. If Canada had any marches, what's the effect in Great Britain of that? That's like the United States sitting up there protesting Trudeau. What effect is that really going to have?
No, Adrian, I know you guys have had some protests in Canada lately. I was just kidding. But I mean, What do you mean, though? Like, what about Puerto Rico protesting? That would kind of matter to the United States. They're a territory.
Yeah, the only thing about that is the Commonwealth has had very little, like, even though it is sort of one of those things that kind of, I guess you could say is a bit of a unifying thing, it holds very little merit these days, that even if it was like Australia, Canada, or any other one of these countries that are part of the Commonwealth, it really wouldn't matter. It's a lot like MC says. It's just like another country protesting, and it means very little to them, unfortunately.
If you think Puerto Rico makes a difference, tell me why they still don't have power.
Well, good point. I have no rebuttal to that.
MC wins that one.
Well, Adrian, you had a couple good ideas for dystopian future type movies, at least. Bring one up and tell us why you think it kind of seems plausible, or already is kind of in effect. I keep going back to 1984, like everybody else does, because Big Brother, and you could see that happening.
Well, the main one, the two that I mentioned in the Discord were Judge Dredd and Demolition Man. And between those two, I think Demolition Man would probably be one of the better examples. And it would have to be with a lot of what was outlawed and allowed inside the society at the time. And everyone thought that it was such a great society until here comes Sylvester Stallone from the past and pretty much shows them that their new ways are not any better. So one way was the fact that nobody touched each other, and it was more not. I don't think that was necessarily a law, but that was more just of an overall social agreement that nobody touched each other. And it seems like it's a good idea. I mean, like for their perspective, I mean, you would pretty much wouldn't have to worry too much about assaults, sexual assaults, things like that. But without the ability to touch one another, then you're really losing a big part of your humanity. On top of this, things such as swearing was outlawed, which, again, seems like it's not a big deal. But then if even the simple act of swearing is not allowed, then that's just showing a huge infringement on the freedom of speech. And then they also outlawed all sorts of drugs, including like all sorts of stimulants, coffee, tobacco. Essentially, the whole idea was to try and make a more perfect society. But in doing it, it took away all forms of personal choice to the individual, and it made them all essentially drones to the state.
And the method that they chose to use to enact that was always on a crisis. For example, the whole reason that the whole non-touching movement came about was the list of venereal diseases and mass plagues that had happened. All right, the reason that the overall society went to hell was because of a massive earthquake, where you had this massive earthquake going down, so therefore this was the solution. Right, was government control. Government come in there and take over and help out. So basically, they used natural disasters and so forth to enact these things in the idea of we're here to help you. We're from the government. We're here to help.
And then even something like having children, you needed to have a license for, and you didn't do it you didn't have sex in order to do it. There, they had some sort of machine that you put on your head, and then from there, you had some sort of simulated version of sex, which means that also it was controlling your ability to repopulate. It was controlling your ability to even be intimate with your husband or wife, which is just, again, going along with MC said, it had to do with all about governmental control. As I kind of got older and I looked at that movie more and watched it a couple more times, it really seemed to me like that was the end result for everything, even though they don't really state it inside the movie. The whole end result for everything was just in order for the government to gain that control over its populace in order to avoid any sort of dissent. Now, in that situation, they were trying to present it as if all the bad things had ended. So, for instance, there was no war, there was no crime. But I actually think one of the biggest dangerous ideas anyone has ever put forward is the idea of a utopia. Anybody who has ever suggested a utopia, every single time, and even when it's been put into play in real life, it always ends up as a dystopia. So, like, some people who actually these days still try and advocate for it are either foolish or they know what they're trying to state, and they're just trying to put themselves at the top. The idea of something like people say, well, that wasn't real communism, as an example. Pretty much their main idea is that, well, if I was in charge of the communist utopia, then we never would have ended up in this situation. But you can never make everybody happy. Everyone is so different that the only way you would ever be able to have everybody on the same page would be through the act of control, which is essentially it's control at the point of a gun.
Well, that's one thing that I don't think people have a very good in today's society. One thing that has been mentally erased in our modern Western culture, right, is how fragile human life actually is. All right, how easy it is to die, to be killed. Okay, now why am I bringing that up? Because in natural disasters and things, that gets brought forward. How powerless you can be, not just as a human being, but as a group of people, but as a city. All right, when a big natural disaster happens, all right, how quickly life can be snuffed out, and we tend to forget that in the Western world. And the reason for that is we tended to do things to mitigate many of these natural disasters from really having the effects that it could have. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but one of the reasons you don't see people thinking about like hurricanes being all that serious and why Katrinas are so much of an outlier is because we put in walls to prevent these things from ever really taking place. These things used to happen on a fairly regular basis within humanity. The people understood why life was precious. And the reason it was precious is because it was so easily lost, and freedom even more so.
Well, on top of this too, when we're talking about the natural disaster thing, is back in the day too, you didn't have this sort of mass media where you could put out that a disaster has happened. So, and you also didn't have as many people that were willing to run into the disaster situation in order to help. So if something like this happens, such as a hurricane, the people who were affected would be left on their own to rebuild their society. And before you can do that, you're going to have sort of like you saw in Katrina, which is absolute mass chaos where people are willing to loot, kill, and do anything else to each other before you can actually come together and rebuild that society.
Yeah, absolutely. But what you also see, though, is like the Cajun Navy. You see citizens take it upon themselves to go and help. You know what I mean? Like when it came to Houston, or even I think Katrina, I think they tried to help then too. I think that's when they were first formed. But there is private citizens that will help if the government will allow them. But even with the Cajun Navy, I think some government official told them not to even show up, that it's too dangerous, don't risk yourselves. And they're like, whatever, and went anyway, into Houston, I believe.
Well, yeah, you had to have basically people ignoring government officials and doing stuff on their own anyway. But then again, the government officials at this point in time more or less let it happen. What would have happened if they would have stood up and said, "No, we told you not to go. We're going to arrest you. You know, we're going to physically bar you from actually going in there." Now, in the United States today, at this point in time, I honestly believe that most people would say, "Well, screw you," all right, and they would do it anyway, and then dare them to actually take that. But in a situation where you've got a compliant, society, where people are reliant upon society and reliant upon them to tell them what to do, I mean, I can easily see us going down that kind of a road where okay, we're in charge. Okay, they're in charge. Just do what they tell them.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if Alex Jones was full of shit or not, but I remember him talking and going on and on about these FEMA camps and shit, and that's just what I thought. It's some big disaster, the big earthquake hits California, right? Everybody just head to the camps. The government will help you. Well, what happens when the camp gets isolated and the government can't drop food in and you have it overcrowded? There's more people in the camp than you were expecting, because that always happens. Then
kill them
you
all
get
and start with a new set of campers.
Yeah, I mean, you can't trust the government to save you in a real crisis ever. Don't rely on them. Don't.
Well, their responses are going to be. I mean, as long as the population is looking at that, meaning the government, rather, not the population, but as long as the government is looking at it as I'm trying to help people, you're right. I mean, they may not be able to help, but at least they're trying. What do you do in the case of, for example, where the attitude of the government falls along the lines of the Soviet Union, right? Where people starving by the millions, all right, and they didn't care. They thought of this as a good thing to reduce population in one area that was causing them problems.
That's when I probably would have ended up in a gulag or something and executed, because I would have grabbed an AK. What else are you gonna do? They already want you dead. They're already killing you. The first time you watch your fucking son or daughter die, you no longer give a fuck.
Well, if you do watch your child die, that'll change things. That's very true. But the corresponding aspect of that is suppose you saw them save your daughter. You saw the government save your daughter. Those people are going to be wanting to defend the government. They're going to be willing to pick up the rifle the other way because they saved my kid. I'm beholden to them.
And that's how civil wars happen. I totally get the moral predicament, because there is no right or wrong in that situation other than the government is wrong. But the people involved is what I'm saying. There's no right or wrong. It's all gray. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, I understand. You just want a civil war. You're a bomb-throwing anarchist.
Yeah. Well, that's what the test said. I don't know. kind of like the ink blot test. What's it really mean? Right, Quinn?
Totally agree with you, mate. You know what I'm like for the whole rebellion thing? It's not like I don't like to burn it down quite often. But to be fair, burning out the corruption may well be what we need to do.
The more and more I just watch what's going on in the UK, the more and more I feel that there really is going to be a V for Vendetta moment where someone's just either going to burn down or blow up the entire parliament and try and rebuild it all from scratch.
Sometimes you have to start again from the beginning. If you find something that isn't working, like it or not, get rid of it and get something that does work. Don't try to make a totally failing system drag your people down. Start again.
Well, isn't that what Thomas Jefferson meant when he said the tree of liberty needs to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants? It is a natural manure. That's what he's talking about. Sometimes the people need to rebel, and that's why we have a Second Amendment. And I don't think people really get that. I think they believe it's for shooting quail or some faggoty shit. You know what I mean?
Well, no, that is the reason for the Second Amendment, because you got to protect the First. All right, the governments, no matter what the government, whatever government's in charge, right? As soon as you use that term, in charge, okay, well then, they are a threat. There was a view under the founding of the United States that government was a necessary evil, right? They termed it as an evil because they understood their limitations of man as a species more than we do today, and that becomes problematic. All right, when you forget, okay, government is never going to limit itself. All right, it's going to take other things to limit it, and if it becomes too big, if it becomes too impressive, then the only way that limitation is going to take place is through the use of force. Now, I'm not advocating a violent overthrow. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. All right, but if it truly becomes oppressive, I mean, that's what governments always will slide into, because other people there are people that enjoy dominating other individuals, that enjoy dominating people. That's an aspect of humanity. Does every human have that? No, I don't think every human has it, but it is so widespread within the human condition that it's there. I mean, you're not going to erase it because you wave a magic wand and say, okay, it doesn't exist anymore. That's not how it works.
Yeah, no, and I don't remember the Latin phrase for it, but the will to dominate, and that's what puts people even in the mind frame to run for office or to try and become prime minister or what have you. It is the will to dominate. It is the ego saying, I'm the one to lead. And that's why the best leaders are the ones that have leadership thrust upon them, because they don't have that urge to dominate. They didn't seek it out. It was forced on them. And then they have to do what they have to do. Or am I wrong there?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I also think it goes without saying that no one's actually advocating for a violent overthrow, but it's being realistic that it could come to that, because we've seen that time again in history. And actually, while we're kind of on the topic of the Second Amendment, it has been something that I've been noticing a lot more lately, is that a bunch of the gun right advocates, they end up starting to talk about how they do want to take the guns away from the gun owners, but the only way that you could possibly do this is at the point of a gun. So they're not actually against the guns, they're just against anybody else who disagrees with them, anybody else who has a different form of opinion from having those weapons, which can then show the dangers of what the government thinks, when we're talking about the Second Amendment. Right. Well, if they're the only ones with the guns, guess who rules? This is why, I make some of the statements that I make, and some of it's tongue in cheek, of course. But at the same time, I'm serious about when I talk about the United States military, all right, and what it would take, how close we are, how razor thin the edge is, because everything revolves upon the idea and what people's view of that idea is. It's really the only thing that stops people and stops the military from taking over is their belief in an idea, nothing more. It's their concept that prevents us going down the same road as Venezuela, as going down the road of Rome. And with the amount of firepower the U.S. military currently has, who's going to stop them? If that idea doesn't stop them, how else are you going to stop them? I mean, we're a lot closer than people think we are. We're a lot more fragile in many ways than people truly understand, and that in and of itself to me is very dangerous. Is that lack of awareness to what it takes, what it would take, where we exist within society, how close to the edge. What's the word I'm looking for? Civilization always is to barbarism. We're always a lot closer to barbarism than people seem to think.
Well, yeah, I saw a thing on History Channel. What they say? They said we're all 30 days away from just being cannibals, pretty much, or at least tearing apart society. The Walking Dead, what goes on there post-zombie, if you take the zombies out and make it a virus that killed all those people, you still have what's going on. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
No, that's right.
Okay. Okay, so when we're talking about the Walking Dead too, is one thing that I think I've noticed too is as the seasons have gone on, it's become less about the zombies and about what the different groups of people are doing to each other, even when the zombies aren't around. So we have so many of these stories of where Rick and his group get put up against another group of humans there, and it never ends out well for them, except for maybe once or twice where they actually unify together. I think in a lot of ways the series has actually shown it's moved on from zombies and moves on to what humans can do to each other when put in that situation, when pushed to the end, when they push to the brink, and you know, it's all that's left is you got that small group of people. They really go back to that tribal state where if it's you're not with us, you're our enemy.
Well, if you think about it, a zombie apocalypse isn't actually as bad as people think. At the end of the day, the zombies actually have a, for want of a better term, a half-life. They will eventually die off. All it really takes is humans to be able to put themselves in a secure, safe location away from said zombies, keeping the infection out, though, again, crossing it over with the Walking Dead, there is the everybody's already infected, which is a scary.
Well, Quinn, you can continue. I just want to point out, I love The Walking Dead, but I always hated that when that came out to where everybody's infected. Well, how exactly did everybody get infected? And you're never going to tell us, are you? You fuckers. Not even in the graphic novels are they going to tell
how
us.
they all got infected. That's one of the things that spoilt the story for me. But like I was saying, if you can lock away, well, I'll be blunt with you. If you can lock away 100,000 humans, it doesn't actually matter what happens to the rest of them. They can all get wiped out because you need 100,000 humans to repopulate the planet. That's all you need. The zombies will eventually die off or, you know, just rot away. After all, we've seen them rot down to a certain point, and they do become slower and, to put it bluntly, a damn sight more useless. So maybe 1 year, the zombies are gone, and those that aren't actually gone yet, the humans can come up and wipe out, to be honest, fairly easily. Zombies are not really as difficult a target. Once you can deal with the infection side of it, I'd like that pointed out, then humanity carries on, and to be fair, the planet will actually be a better place with less humans on it.
Well, once again, you've been reading the Georgia Guidestones, and you should stop. I keep telling you that, but just stop it. No, I mean, I think a zombie is an allegory for today's civilization, really. Everybody's staring at their smartphone. You got people getting ran over because they didn't look when they crossed the fucking street, okay? What was the first thing you were taught when you were a kid, if you lived in the city? You know, you look both ways before you cross the fucking street. God damn.
You gotta love it when they do that, though. I personally think they should actually change the law for drivers. If you run someone down that was just looking at their phone, it should no longer be a crime. It should be Darwinism.
Okay, well, first of all, if you put a law like that into effect in the United States, what would happen is people would run people over and then put a cell phone in their hands.
There's that too.
Yeah. And it'd be one of those crappy flip phones because they went to Goodwill to grab some fucking cell phone. You know, they got a basket of cell phones.
If you ever get into an accident, you just pop open the glove compartment and grab the cell phone that's out of it and stick it in somebody's hand.
Sounds almost like the police with their drop guns, doesn't it?
But another movie I want to talk about. This might be a short one. We might just do 2 hours, so we got another 30 minutes probably. But Minority Report. The idea of arresting people for not crimes they committed today, but crimes they might commit in 2 years. What do you guys think about that idea? And I know it was a Tom Cruise movie, whatever, but...
Interesting concept. Question is how far from it are we now, really, when the government can decide what crimes you've set, even if you haven't yet committed any full crime.
What you're looking at there is a return to slavery. If you're going to try and look at it from that perspective, and where we are today with technology, what people will use it for is to say this population is more likely to do this, so therefore we're going to remove that population's rights to do X, Y, and Z. At which point they become, basically slaves. You're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do that because you belong to population group X, Y, Z.
Well, I think the worst part about that idea too was the fact that they could read people's minds or some shit and see that they were going to do it no matter what they said, right? So
they were looking at that from an individual standpoint of saying, okay, this individual we could predict because of we're staring at goats so long that we can now do this. All right, we can see into the future, and therefore we can be given hints on an individual basis. But I don't think that's likely in any way. In the future, I don't see that as us. We haven't moved in that direction at all from a technological perspective. Not on an individual by individual case. But what you can do is right now with the current technology as it exists is they data mine to look at groups. And you could use that kind of data mining type of scenario to then make group decisions about entire groups, entire people. It won't be done on an individual basis. It'll be done on a collective basis where we're taking out this entire group and we're going to preemptively do X, Y, or Z.
Oh no! From the government perspective, then wouldn't they first target what would be the modern day equivalent of the commies when they were having the fucking list? It'd be like the libertarians, right, or the alt-right, whatever. But the libertarians get thrown in with the crazy people like Richard Spencer for some odd reason. What would happen if we were all considered political dissidents and we should be rounded up? You could do a data mining and find out, I like the Mises Institute, my thoughts on the Civil War. Shit, I'm definitely fucking going to the gulag, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm selling you there.
You think you got problems? Remind you about my army of robots taking over. If they're going to take out somebody, they're going to want to take out somebody who thinks they have the capacity to take over. After all, people in power do not like sharing power.
Not unless they absolutely have to.
Yep.
Yeah, but you've seen a history in the United States of removing a certain group of people and putting them in camps, so to say. So once again, to bring back the FEMA camps, Alex Jones's contention was they're not there to help people. That's not for a disaster. That's for libertarians. That's for political dissidents. They're going to lock us all up. Buy my water filters. But does he kind of have a point, though? You know what I mean?
Well, but the camps that you're talking about from that kind of a society at some point in time will have to be transitioned into work camps. They'll have to be transitioned into concentration camps with the idea of that's where you're going to put political prisoners to keep them in there, right? That transition with the way our society exists currently, all right, within U.S. society is a long ways away. We're not close in that regard, okay? Mainly because within the United States, you don't have that kind of ability to crack down on dissident ideas. Now, does that mean that it can't happen? No, of course not. It can happen. Did at a certain specific point in time we have camps like that? Yeah, we did during a national crisis, all right, such as World War II. That's when those camps sprang up. That's when people were willing to accept that those camps exist, and they were willing to put their neighbors in those camps. Okay. Is that the kind of society that we have today? Well, no. We don't have that kind of society today, so it'd be much less, much less likely. So what would it take to create those camps again? It would take a major conflict. And I'm not talking about the conflict in Iraq. I'm talking about where people are actually worried about the nation actually dying. Okay. Even during the height of 9/11, people never thought about the United States ceasing to exist. There was no idea that was the threat. They wanted to stop the attacks on the American homeland, but they never really thought that the American homeland was really in any danger. Unlike World War II, where that's exactly what people were thinking. Okay, so it would take something along those lines. It would literally take a nuclear weapon, all right, being detonated on our shores, or close to it, all right, in some Western society. It would take the detonation of a nuclear weapon in a Western country for people to get to that idea.
Well, I mean, the populace is already kind of headed in that direction, in my opinion. You have people flipping out about a Confederate flag hanging in a store for sale. You have people shutting down taco stands because the girls that opened it happened to be white. You have all sorts of public outrage over the stupidest of things, but then it gets into that mob mentality, you know, burn the witch. Grab your fucking pitchforks and fucking torches. And what, I mean, I don't know if it would necessarily take a nuclear bomb to push people the one step further than they already are.
All right. The problem with that in the current state is it has to be married to the government. The government has to be the one in control of that thought process. We're not there yet in the United States.
Fair point. Fair point. The populace might be somewhat ready for that type of situation, but the government still has some people that won't go necessarily that far. Although the left and the right seem to be poisoned already. You have the Lindsey Grahams on the right, and you have the Hillary Clintons on the left. And all you really have is people like Rand Paul who get nothing done because everybody hates them because, you know, God forbid you end.
In order for, like I said, in order for that to make it so that the populace would be willing to tolerate that from the government's decisions, all right, where the government is putting people in there, you would need to have some kind of threat to the nation, all right, in some way. Now, whether that threat is real or not, if you could convince enough people, if you're doing a wag the dog scenario, if you could convince enough people that these threats were real and likely to happen, then is something like that definitely possible? Of course it is. But we're not, I just don't see us there at this point in time where we're married to the government yet. It could happen, yes. We're not there yet, at least in the United States. Now, where you've got a scenario for like Great Britain, let's be honest, they're doing that now. That's what this whole control crap is on the press. The press is basically part of the government agency in this case. All right, they're willing partners with the government. This is the problem that happened to Germany during the Nazi takeover. Is the press were willing participants in a large scale with the Nazi movement, which is why the dissident papers were quickly eliminated. And I say quickly, but it's in a relative term. Okay, they were taken out one by one. All right, a few days here, a few months there, that one's gone. A few weeks there, that one's gone. They weren't taken out all at once, but they were taken out one by one. And the press as a whole, the ones that were working with the government, they cheered this. Why? Because let's be honest, there's two reasons. One, they agreed with them, which was the main reason. But the other reason is because at worst, what did they see? They saw a loss of a competitor. Their revenue was better this way. They were working hand in hand with the government. They were part of the government monopoly. Therefore, they had every reason to agree with the government because as a government monopoly, as them participating within that monopoly, they had no rivals. And as long as you listen to the government, which they more or less agreed with their philosophical stances anyway, all right, the better off they were. The less competitors they had. Now, we're not in that kind of society right now. Why? Mainly because the press has lost its control. It could have went that way if the creation of the internet had been stayed off by 2 or 3 decades, for example. Then we very well could have gone down that road, but that's not the road that we live in today because of the internet, to be honest.
And everything you've said, MC, it brings me back to one of the truest and most dangerous lines that was said in one of the Star Wars movie, which is, "This is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause." And it just has to do with the idea that people actually think that the government's doing everything for their benefit before they realize that all of their freedoms have been lost, and they think that it's been done in a good way. I mean, what you were just talking about, the press that in Nazi Germany, this was exactly what was going on there, where you were saying they were cheering it as it was happening. And this is almost in some ways what we're seeing in, I guess, the UK would be a good example. My country's seeing this in a lot of ways. I mean, I know that a recent report came out that said something like 2/3 of Canadians still support the government and support the press. But even though we have just as much fake news, if not, I would even say maybe a little bit worse up here in comparison to what you got down there. But everybody seems to think the idea that the government is actually there to help is strongly it's strongly ingrained in the brains of a lot of other countries, except for maybe the US. And that would probably, you can thank your founding fathers for that, because they even saw how dangerous their power was and they were willing to limit it as much as possible.
Well, it's a good thing and a bad thing. Like I said, the differences in our structure make us stronger and weaker to different things. All right. That's the great thing about, quote, if you want to take a look at Western society, is we have elements that are inoculated to certain threats in other countries to at least help mitigate some of the problems that exist. You know, thankfully, we're not Great Britain right now. Now, hopefully, Great Britain can recover from, let's be honest, a totalitarian takeover. This is, for all intents and purposes, you have a totalitarian takeover right now of Great Britain. Now, can it be resisted? I don't know the answer to that. I'm hoping it can, and I'm hoping it can be peaceful. I don't have a lot of, that's just hope, though. It's a wish. It's a wishful thinking, perhaps. All right, that I'm hoping that takes place. Because right now, it definitely doesn't look good right now. It really doesn't.
Well, yeah, and Jensen, do you have anything you want to rebut that with? Or I'm guessing you're sitting there nodding, huh?
Yeah, sorry. Closest to a rebuttal I can give you is this. America, please take note of what has happened to England, and for fuck's sake, don't let it happen to you.
Yeah, and the sad part is over here, there's so many people that look at Europe and they want to be like Europe. They really do. They want to be in the international community. They want to be more like France. They want to, and it's just not a good idea. They don't get it.
Maybe it's just my pessimistic side, because I tend to fall on the more pessimistic than optimistic side. But I feel like a lot of people aren't going to learn that lesson. And I just look to the idea of socialism right now, like how many people are actually in support of socialism, completely foregoing all the examples that we have now throughout history of how it has failed people and how it's led down an even worse path. It's led people down to, well, totalitarianism, but even mass murder. But yet people, even to today, will call themselves Marxists. People, even to today, will advocate for as much socialism and government control as possible. So I just don't know if people will actually wake up to that lesson or not.
Yeah, and like the whole topic of today, dystopian futures, well, it might be the present. And I think this is probably a good spot to go ahead and leave it at. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This has been the Redeye Stream, number 122. MC's been putting out content. Check his channel out. Adrian, Just My Stupid Opinion, he always puts out good stuff. And Jensen is Discord Lord, so he's starting a bunch of good Discords. I don't think he started it because he lives in the UK, but he helps manage the Free Tommy Discord. He just started that today, or started helping with it. Right, Jensen? You didn't create that. You can't talk about it. But
that's more the point. I would like to deny anything to do with being in any way connected with it whatsoever. Honestly, no.
No, definitely a safe bet.
But anyway, hopefully the UK gets their head back on straight. To them, good night and good luck.